Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H virtual event space. You're tuned into how to take better images of your kids, hosted by Sony. And if you don't have kids, well, you're just out of luck. No, I'm sure you'll learn a thing or two or three here that you can apply elsewhere. For that, I'd like to welcome esteemed award-winning photographer Jason Vinson. Jason, what's going on, man?
Not much, just hanging out in the home office, ready to hopefully pass on a little bit of insight and knowledge into the world of family documentary.
As you always do, you do it so well. So I'm going to do what I do best, get out of your way. I will implore you all to get your questions in. This man is not only a wonderful presenter, but he's also super talented. So take notes, ask questions. He will answer them for you. And I'll see you guys in a bit for some Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. We're going to jump right into everything. Let me make sure that I've got everything I need. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about how to take better pictures of your kids. But before we get too deep into the weeds, sorry, this thing keeps popping away from me. I wanted to talk a little bit about who I am. So I am a husband and father. So this is my wife Chasney, my oldest son Zayden, middle child Riken, and youngest child Kaiden. And primarily, I'm a wedding photographer. And so the majority of the work I do is, I try and capture authentic moments, like grooms crying, brides pulling their dress off of the window, and then, epic moments like the limbo on a dance floor, as well as epic portraits, like when your couple gets married in the fog, or a spring champagne bottle molds with the stars, as well as some epic bridal portraits, things like this. So this is kind of primarily what I do as my main job. But on the side, I also do the family documentary thing. And so how this kind of all got started is I've always been in the space and interested in family documentary images. And this picture here is actually my two nephews, my brother-in-law and my father-in-law on a trip that we did. But I always took family documentary sessions. A lot of people know them as day in the life sessions. And so this is from a day in the life session. Basically, what I do is I go, I hang out with a family, basically from the time the kids wake up all the way until the kids go to sleep. And I just take pictures of everyday moments, things that interest me, things that I find to be important or visually interesting, even things that are funny, like when you're playing with your dog's ears and he's looking at you like, I am done with this game. Interesting light, and then, just the struggles of having kids and, trying to feed a baby, and then you have two rambunctious kids. But throughout all of this process, I never had kids of my own until we actually started having kids. And then I had the pleasure of actually documenting all three kids' births. So this is my son, Zayden. This is Riken. And then this is the youngest, Kaiden. But even through all of this, from the very first time we had our kid, like this is our son when we first brought him home. I had a camera. I took photos here and there, but it was never done with intention. Like I just kind of took it out when I felt like it, to grab a random image here and there, playing around on the carpet with the dog and things like that. But for the most part, every time I would take out the camera, it would be for things like family trips. So this is the very first time we took our son Zayden on a trip. He's 3 months old. We had a wedding in Tulum, Mexico, and so we brought him along with us, just kind of exploring the beaches. We've also taken him to Hawaii. This is an underwater boat, as well as we also took him. This is whale watching in Hawaii. We take him to all of our weddings that we had when we first had him. We had a ton of destination weddings, and we don't do them as much anymore just because we don't like to travel now that we have kids as much. But before he turned 1, he went on 19 different flights. And so I was always just kind of documenting while we were away. But when it came time to being home, the camera really only came out for special occasions. So things like birthday parties, one like first time things like getting your hair cut, until COVID happened. Okay, so COVID is kind of the turning point for not only my appreciation for documentary photography, but also just like my ability. Like I did it a ton more, and so I just got better and better at it. And so through COVID, what ended up happening is I had a lens that I needed to write a review about, and at the time there were no sessions going on, and so obviously I didn't have any shoots to test it on, so I just used it at home. And so I took photos of my kids one day, and I enjoyed it, and so I did it the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and I just kept doing it. And I eventually switched away from this lens that I was reviewing, and I started using the main lens that I use now, which we'll get into. But I eventually needed to find a stopping point for this project that I didn't know was a project until I just kept doing it for so many days that it just kind of became a thing. And I got to 25 and I was still wanting to shoot. And then eventually I got to 50 days and I was like, this feels like a good stopping point. And so it became 50 days of quarantine. And I'm going to play this real quick. It's just a quick little 2-minute slideshow. But I want to give you an example of kind of, to me, what the end result of this type of project turns into. Okay, so hopefully that's played well for you guys. Let me pull my thing back up. And so through all of this, as well as my previous engagements with family documentary, I've won a handful of awards. This is an award that I won through Documentary Family Awards, and we'll get a little bit more into these images later. Here's another story award through Fearless Family Photographers. A couple random awards through the same platform. Last year, I was blessed enough to win the award as Family Photographer of the Year. And all this to say that I don't think that there is a destination with photography, and I'm definitely not like an all-knowing family documentary photographer. But at the end of the day, I don't think that awards like really matter. At the end of the day, you should just really appreciate the work that you do and hope that it has meaning. But I simply bring up awards to show that I have some type of credibility and at least a little bit of knowledge that I can hopefully pass on to everybody watching. So why documentary instead of portraits? So I don't say this to devalue portraits. Like, I still think portraits are very important. We do them for our families. We're actually going to do some family photos this coming weekend. I take portraits of the kids here in my little home office studio as well. So I do think that portraits are very important. and I still do them. But for me, the documentary images have a lot more lasting value. And it really boils down to this quote, and I'm not even sure where I heard this. It's just kind of one of those things. I think it might have been in like a TikTok or something. So if you know who first said this, let me know. But it's one day you will pick up your kids for the last time and you won't even know that it's happening, right? And this stuck with me the very first time I heard it. And I try and apply it as I go through life. And I have a recent story of my son who is now getting ready to turn 6. And he started to take showers, which as kids grow up, they start taking showers and they stop taking baths and stuff. And I just so happened to have this like random thought in my head of, he's doing showers more and more. And most of the time when he does bath time, he does it with mom. And I was like, I could have unknowingly already done my last bath time with my son. And so I had that thought go through my head. And as he's getting ready to get in the shower, he just stops and he goes, I want to take a bath with you. And so I was like, or do bath time with me. And so I was like, yes, I had a ton of stuff that I was like planning on getting done as he was going to be in the shower. But because I had that thought go through my head, I was like, okay, yes, we are going to do bath time. So we did our normal bath time. We played, we had a bunch of fun. He splashed water all over the floor as he normally does. But I was able to appreciate the moments just because I had that insight. I had that thought of like, I might never do bath time with him again. And the reason why documentary photos are important is because you don't always have that insight. You don't always have that thought. Sometimes moments happen in your life or things happen in your life that you don't know you're going to miss them, or you don't appreciate them in the moment. And an example is kind of this, like our son got this inflatable dinosaur. It was just a random toy that we got him and he loved it. He played with it every day for like a week. He brought it everywhere he went, in the front yard, in the backyard. He even took it into bath. And then one day the dinosaur just kind of disappeared. And as I was going through images for this presentation, if I didn't have these images, I would have totally forgot that these sets of moments even happened. Or things like the very first time he gets to go out and play in snow, or catch snowflakes on his tongue, or realize that, it's a lot faster if you could just lick the snow off the ground. And then also realizing that, the snow is actually kind of cold and miserable sometimes. Or my daughter, who for a week decided that she was going to eat dinner upside down. Or, the struggles of potty training and the struggles of having a newborn when you also have 2 older kids that you have to entertain and a house to try and maintain and a job. Or when your daughter gets to push her baby sister for the very first time around the block, or just the exhausting moments when everyone's kind of winding down at the end, but everyone still has to be touching mom. Okay. So these are all moments that, as time goes by, they'll just slip out of your mind and you'll never remember them. Okay. So it's hard to talk about photography without at least somewhat bringing up gear. So the gear I recommend is just the gear that you have with you. So it could be whatever camera you own. It could be simply your cell phone. So all of these next few images were taken on my cell phone. And so including the one of my son being like a 40-year-old man eating his lunch and then passing out with his hands down his pants. Or passing out and taking a nap with our dog, just playing in the sprinklers, some family time at the park. All these are just cell phone photos, okay? And just because it's a cell phone photo doesn't mean you can't apply the laws of photography and get a good composition and wait for good lighting. And you can actually take these photos and you can edit them and do all this fun stuff. And so use whatever gear that you have with you, even if it is just your cell phone, because you can still take amazing images with that. That said, the gear that I use, so I use the Sony A9 and I use the Sony 24mm G Master lens. And I'll talk about both of those specifically and why. But as far as settings go, I shoot Aperture Priority, Auto ISO with a minimum shutter speed of 1/250th almost always, and then silent shutter. And then I use exposure compensation to make the image brighter or darker as I'm shooting. Okay, so why the Sony A9? So the reason why I use the Sony A9 specifically is because of the silent shutter. It has no rolling shutter. It has super fast autofocus, and it can shoot at 20 frames per second. So for me, the reason why silent shutter is very important is because I never want my camera to limit what I can photograph. So this is an image that I took in San Francisco. We were walking around all over the place, and we're calling an Uber back, and it's way past my son's nap time, and he is having a horrific meltdown, does not want to be put in the car seat. We have to force him in the car seat. This poor Uber driver is just listening to him scream. And my wife gets up real close to him face to face, and he falls asleep. And now, had I had a camera with a loud shutter, I would have not taken this photo because I absolutely do not want him to wake back up. But because I have a silent shutter, I can feel free to photograph this moment knowing that my camera is not going to interrupt it. Okay. Similarly, when my son decides that he wants to climb up to the top of our pantry to try and sneak some candy, I can feel free to photograph this moment in its entirety without pulling him away from what he's doing and ruining the moment. Okay. Or things like nap time. Like, you never want to wake up your kids from nap time, but because I have a quiet camera, I can feel free to take photos and it not wake them up. Or when my kids are sneaking a lick of batter from the cookies they're making when mom walks away, they don't realize that I'm here taking the photo, and I can get a photo like this. But it's also important on which camera you use for your silent shutter, because they are not created equal. So the Sony A9, and I'm sure other brands have a similar type of sensor design, but what it has is it's called a stack sensor. I don't want to get too far into the weeds of technicalities here. But what happens is the way that a sensor is read, if you don't have a stacked sensor, the readout speed is a lot slower, and you'll end up getting things like banding when you're working in like fluorescent lights, or if there's a lot of movement, things can be super warped. And so those are kind of traits that I don't want to be part of my imagery. And so that's why I prefer the Sony A9, or specifically images with a stacked sensor that I can shoot silently. Okay. So I can do things like run down the street as my son's running in this puddle of water, and I don't have to worry about things warping and bending. Okay. Now, as far as settings go, why aperture priority? I know it's like a big no-no when you're coming up as a photographer. Everyone's like, you got to shoot manually, you got to learn manually, you got to learn shutter speed, aperture, ISO, all that fun stuff. And I would have to agree with that because you need to know the basics of how your camera works. But aperture priority just takes all of the mental capacity and helps me focus on the image instead of having to figure out what my camera is doing. Okay. So what I do is I have my aperture set to whatever I want it to be. Most of the time it's something like f1.4, but I'll play around with that. And then I will have the minimum shutter speed set to 1/250th of a second, and then my ISO set to auto. And so what happens is, as I'm taking a photo, if I'm shooting in a really harsh sunlight and I'm exposing for the highlights, I can have the exposure compensation down to make the image a little darker so I can expose for those highlights. And then whenever I go to shoot something in the shadows, I simply turn my camera and I can adjust my exposure compensation to say I want it a little bit brighter. And if my shutter speed has to go below 1/250th of a second in order to achieve this brightness, it'll automatically ramp up my ISO. And so I don't have to worry about settings. I don't have to be like, oh, I need to go up in ISO, and then I go up in ISO and it's like, oh, now I need to adjust my shutter speed. And there's a whole bunch of back and forth here. Even if you're really good and really fast, you will never be as fast as what your camera can do with these settings paired to an exposure compensation dial. And for me, almost always 1/250th of a second is fast enough. But for images similar to this, like I upped my aperture so that I could get a little bit more depth of field, and my ISO went up. This technically, I would have liked it to be a little bit sharper on him, but it's fine. But I also, as far as that minimum shutter speed goes, if you're shooting something that's really fast, I have a custom button on my camera that I can quickly change my minimum shutter speed. So I can still shoot with all of the same settings, but I can say, you know what, I want my minimum shutter speed to be 1/500th of a second or 1/1000th. I get to choose that. Just most of the time I'm at 1/250th. But I can also go the other way. So my A9 has in-body image stabilization, and I feel comfortable shooting at about 1/4 of a second as long as my subjects aren't moving. And so I can do that in situations like this where it's really dark. I can go to a super low shutter speed and rely on my image stabilization. So I can capture this photo while not having to go crazy high on my ISO. And that also makes me get a little bit more dynamic range out of my files and stuff like that. And then again, silent shutter, because had all of my kids and wife heard the clicking of a shutter, I would have pulled them out of this moment. Okay. And so again, just aperture priority, and then I get to choose what the depth of field is. And so if I want a little bit more depth of field, so I can have a little bit more of like the players in the background, I get to choose that. And then my camera kind of takes care of the rest. Okay. So 24 millimeters is kind of a weird lens in terms of, documentary work. And, a lot of people use it for like landscapes and stuff like that, but it's not normally regarded as like a documentary lens for that. Most people would turn to something like a 35 millimeter. And if you're new to this style of work, I would actually suggest maybe going with something like a 35 millimeter, at least to start. And then figure out if you want something a little tighter or a little bit wider. So I used to do a lot of work with 35 millimeter, and then I ended up going to 24 millimeter, because for me, what I decided is that I want to show the grandness of where my kids are, as well as the danger that they get themselves into. But I still want to be somewhat close and just in case something goes astray. So like when my daughter is super young and she's climbing up to this very tall, like little rock wall that we have in our backyard as part of our playground, I still want to be close as she's climbing to make sure that she doesn't miss a step, because I have saved all 3 of our kids' lives as they climb up this rock wall just because they decide to take a tumble. But if she's just standing there looking around, I feel comfortable enough to take a quick step back and take a photo and then get back close to be there for safety reasons. But with 24 millimeters, I don't need to take as many steps back to show the scene. But if I was at 35, I would have to take a little bit more steps back. And so that's one of the reasons why I prefer to have the 24 millimeters. And so when my son decides that he wants to climb the ladder and try and get on the roof in his underwear, I can get a little far back and take a photo with the 24 millimeter. Or if they're trying to climb on the counters, my back is literally against the refrigerator in our kitchen. And so had I been at 35 millimeters, I couldn't actually show the full scene. Like I would have cut off my daughter's leg or my son's head or something like that, and actually in order to actually show what it is they're getting up to. So especially for situations where I'm inside, 24 millimeters is definitely good for the type of work that I do, because I can get far enough back to kind of show the scene, like when my son's being crazy and trying to throw himself over the top of this rocking chair. But I also love specifically the Sony 24 millimeter G Master lens, because distortion wise, it's doesn't really have that bad of like wide angle distortion. So I still feel comfortable taking close up portraits of people. And I actually love the angle of view that I get from this lens without the distortion that you normally get from something that's this wide. So I'm not sure what other brands have, but the Sony G Master is actually really phenomenal with this. It also has really good edge sharpness. So I put my subjects on the very edges of the frame a lot. And so I don't have to worry about those going too blurry or out of focus or having weird like chromatic aberrations and things like that. Because the G Master is just really good, especially like this situation I'm shooting at f1.4. And so normally with a wide angle lens, you might want to stop down in order to get rid of some of that wide angle, those wide angle aberrations and things like that. Okay. So logistics. This is one of the things that I get asked a lot, especially when it comes to the 50 days project. And so I guess I didn't actually dive too much into that. So after the 50 days of quarantine, I actually do that project every single year now. And so I document my kids every day for 50 straight days. I did it in quarantine. I did 50 days of summer, 50 days of spring. I just did 50 days of 2023. And for these projects, what I do is I just take the camera with me literally everywhere I go. So if we go to the pool, the camera comes with me. If we go to the zoo, the camera comes with me. We go on a flight, the camera comes with me so I can take pictures of them taking a nap before our flight takes off. But especially where this comes into play is at home, because at home is where it's really hard, because you get into the day-to-day, you're doing dishes, you're getting kids ready for bed. And so you don't really want a camera strapped to you all the time. And so what I do is I just keep the camera in kind of a central location, something that's easy for me to grab. And so for me and our house, that is the mantle on our fireplace. So the camera just kind of lives there until I see something happen. And so if there's interesting light, I can grab the camera and I can grab an image. If my daughter's being crazy, I can grab it off the mantle and take an image. If my son decides he wants to help with diaper changing and realize how stinky it is, I can quickly grab an image. Even things like TV time. And then from there, if I go anywhere else in the house or anywhere else outside that living room is no longer a central location, I just move the camera with me. So I don't necessarily need to wear it, but if I go to bath time, I can put it on the bathroom counter. If we go outside, then I'll throw it over my shoulder. So when we're playing in the front yard, I'll go ahead and I'll wear it. If we go in the backyard, I'll go ahead and I'll wear it. And the idea is just to have the camera ready all the time. If we go on walks, the camera is with me. Okay. Now, the trick with this is that you don't always have to be shooting. Okay. So when I tell this to people, they think that I'm just like always photographing. And when you look at some of these images, especially when you go through a project, it might have the implications that are the feel like I'm always taking photos. But in reality, what I'm really doing is I'm just waiting for things to inspire me. Okay. So I'm looking for, compositions or moments or interesting light. And that's when I take a photo. So there's times where we go on a walk and I just carry the camera with me and I don't take any photos. But when my son decides to throw on a cape and a mask and ride his four-wheeler, I'm probably going to take some photos. Okay. My daughter's sticking her face through the fence and the light's hitting her lips perfect. I'm probably going to take some photos. And when it looks like the face of our car has feet, these are kind of the moments where the camera comes off of the shoulder and up to my eye and I start taking images. Okay. So silly moments, interesting moments where my son's just kind of looking out the window. And for things like this, like he's just looking out the window. And so I see what he's doing. And so I just run out the front door, around the house, and I get an image like this. Okay. Or just looking for interesting light. Okay. So another trick with this is that you don't have to show everything. Okay. So feel free to take the occasional snapshot, right? Like if something cute's happening, go ahead and take a photo. Not everything is going to be a work of art, but you have to try, you have to explore the options of it. And so also even just cute little moments like my son trying to teach my infant daughter about insects. Like it's not a super amazing image, but for us as a family, it's a cherished moment that will just live on a gallery or maybe eventually make its way to a book or something. Or, when my son throws on a shirt that is way too small, I think he grabbed his sister's shirt and threw it on. So it's just funny, cute little moments that are not necessarily anything spectacular, but they'll be cherished works of or cherished moments, at least for you and your family. Like when your daughter gets to hold her sister for nap time, or even just a shadow self-portrait and the dog makes a little cameo. And then also, preparing to take a photo and hoping something interesting will happen. And then sometimes something interesting just doesn't happen, right? Like they sat down to eat popsicles, they finished it, and then they wanted to go inside. So nothing really ended up coming of this. But I was still taking photos because I was inspired by the composition, the light's nice. And then there's also things like this. Like I love this photo of them arguing which direction we're going to walk around the block, right? But at the end of the day, this specific image might not make the end project or might not make the cut when it comes to sharing images. But it doesn't mean I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to keep it. And so just for reference, this is the last project I did, which I shot a lot less than I normally do. It's as we've had more and more kids, it's gotten harder and harder to actually shoot as much as I'd like to. I think a lot of these images I actually took with my youngest daughter in my hands. But for the 50 days, I took close to 8,000 images. Of that, a little more than 13,000 got just like a basic edit. And all 1,300 of these will live just like on an online gallery where we can access them all. And then of that, only 145 of those images got like some tender love and care when it comes to editing. And I felt like they were somewhat share worthy. And then of the 145, about 80 ended up making the final slideshow or will make like the final book. So of all these projects, they also get turned into an album that we have. Is just kind of like a yearbook in school. You have a yearbook for every grade. I'm trying to make a yearbook for every year. Okay. So with that, my rules. So I have rules in quotation marks here because there really are no rules. I have some like rules that I give myself, but at the end of the day, this isn't a courthouse, and we're not doctors performing surgery and things like that. And so there really are no rules, but for me, I prefer no posing and no directing. Okay, so I prefer to capture moments, authentic moments as they unfold, because I can never come up with things like this, like my daughter giving up her little unicorn bubble machine and jumping up and wanting to look in the telescope. Like that juxtaposition I really enjoy, and this is something that like I never would have come up with on my own. Or like telling my wife, hey, put on these goggles and laugh at the kid. So I want to capture authentic moments. That said, you know your kids, so it's okay to plan for what your kids normally do. So we went outside. My daughter decided she wanted to blow on this little dandelion thing, and spit goes everywhere, but the image wasn't great. But I know kids are kids, and so I know probably the next day or the day after that, or even the day after that, one day she's going to pick that up again and she's going to do it again. And so I can be a little bit more prepared to get a better image of this specific moment. Okay. Or I know my son is crazy and he always wants to climb on things. And so when I see something, I'm like, oh, he's absolutely going to try and climb that statue. Then I can prepare for that situation. Or I know that whenever we do swim lessons, he's always the kid that is there last. Like he's the last one that wants to turn off that shower. So I know I can sit there and I can wait and I can get him kind of alone in the shower. And then there's things like this where, I'm not opposed to alter the scene a little bit. So in general, just out of respect for the craft of documentary work, I try not to do anything. So definitely no posing and no directing, but I also try to just work with the scene that's given to me. So I try not to mess with lights and blinds, and I try not to move anything in the frame. So like clothes, water bottles, anything like that. That said, I'm not opposed to every once in a while if it's like a life or death moment, or like when push comes to shove and it's either get the picture or don't get the picture. I'm not opposed to moving a plate off the table or turning a light on, or in a lot of cases turning a light off, because you get that weird mixed lighting and stuff like that sometimes. So in general, I try not to, but every once in a while I will if it's needed. So with that, when it comes to actually documenting and taking photos, and like when does the camera come off of the mantle? When does the camera come off of the shoulder and to the eye? I'm always looking for light, moment, and composition. And a little subcategory of composition is perspective, because they're kind of the same thing, but for me, it helps me think about it a little bit differently. And so I kind of want to show that to everybody. So in terms of light, it's just any light that I find interesting. So it could be, I'm playing with a projector, trying to get something to work, and my son is in the projector. And so to me, that is interesting light. Or light like this light is in our living room every morning at this time of year. And so I can plan and I can wait for someone to do something within that light. Same thing for upstairs in our playroom. At a certain time of day, during a certain time of the year, this light is always there. And so I can wait for certain moments to unfold within that light. And we could be playing in this playroom for 2 hours and they never go near this spot of light. But when they do, that's when the camera comes up. Okay. And then obviously there's moments. So when there's interesting moments, then that's obviously when the camera comes up as well. So when the kids are super sweaty and they're sharing a blue slushie at the park, I love this moment. So that's when the camera came up. So anything that draws my eye, or like when both kids are trying to take a picture of their new baby sister, camera comes up. Or when I realize that my son is copying everything that my shadow does, okay, camera comes up. And then obviously when kids are kids and just being weird, obviously the camera has to come up. Or when they're exploring and playing with a new friend that they found in the lawn, obviously the camera comes up. Okay. So from there, it's also composition. So it's not always about light and moment, but the composition as well. Like what are you trying to say, and what is going to be part of the frame? Okay. So we're at a toy store and my son gets tired and he decides he's just going to sit down. And to him, there's nothing about it. But to me, I just see, a little boy with a bunch of stuffed animals, and he looks like he's like part of the toy shelf. Okay. And so that to me is an interesting composition. Or when our playground or our driveway is covered with chalk drawings, but he's rolling around in his cape and mask next to a drawing that he did of himself wearing a cape and a mask. Like those are compositional elements that I'm drawn to. or like our bouncy house. We have a little cheap bounce house that we got on Amazon that will blow up in the garage. And so he was just playing in it as it was deflating, and I loved the pattern and the color and stuff like that. And so getting the camera up high, I'm able to show that. Now, had I just taken like a snapshot style image, you would have just seen my messy garage and then him with his face sticking out the top of it. Okay. So trying to get interesting compositions that kind of tell a story and just narrowing in on what it is that you find interesting. So him playing with this dinosaur toy on the windowsill. And so that comes perspective. And so perspective is kind of a different way to think about composition. So in general, there's the general rule of composition, like get wide, get close, get high, get low. And so for me, I'm always trying to get my camera into a perspective that you wouldn't normally view the scene. And so I'm trying to tell the story from an interesting point of view or an interesting perspective. And a lot of the times we don't lay on the ground to view the world. And so if you get your camera way down low looking up, you can usually find some interesting perspectives that tell the story in an interesting way that most people aren't going to just kind of stumble upon and view naturally. Same thing with getting the camera underwater. So even if you have goggles, like a lot of us don't throw goggles on during bath time, or even in the swimming pool. Okay. And so just getting the camera in a situation that you can show the viewer a different perspective. Okay. And so I'm always trying to figure out what about the moment is most interesting and how can I draw the viewer's attention to that same thing, and whether that be light, moment, or composition. Okay. And so things like this, we're at the zoo, and the orangutans are just playing around right up against the window. And had I taken even just like 1 foot back, you would just see tons of kids playing around. But because I got close, I'm able to only show the orangutan and my son's hand pressed up against the glass. Okay. Or my son is driving the boat with the help of his granddad, or his grandpa. So not only can I show him driving the boat, but I can show his concentration in the mirror. So I have a couple photos where I'm at the side showing it, but it's really hard to show what he's doing, as well as his concentration. And so coming around the back of him, I was able to get this reflection so you can actually see a little bit of both. Or even just little silly things like when my son and daughter are on the same swing, but when they swing just at the right angle, it looks like it's just like one weird misshapen body. Okay. So not every photo has to have a meaning. It just be interesting or silly or funny. Okay. Like images like this, my son just playing with our dog upstairs in the playroom and the lights hitting right. And it just is an interesting moment. Okay. Or the moments just before this frog is going to get the poke in the head. Okay. So the point of all this is not to settle for a snapshot. So I know earlier I talked about, yes, grab snapshots, but that's not the end goal. So you start with the snapshot and then you work your way into hopefully getting something better. And sometimes it won't end up being better, but the end goal is to have the end result be a better image than the snapshot. And so this is kind of an example. This is a photo of my son sitting on this little electric scooter thing. My daughter comes up for a bite of popsicle and he willingly shares it. So this is a cute little moment, but it's not super interesting, right? But this image I feel like is a lot more interesting. Exact same thing is happening, but my son's having more of a reaction to it, right? He's leaning back. And so to show you kind of the build up to this, it starts off with my son. Let me have my mouse here. It starts off with my son just on it. And I feel like, okay, this is kind of interesting. He's giving me like these weird hands and stuff like that. And then my daughter comes up and she takes a bite of popsicle and then she stops and she chews it up. And then she takes another bite and then she stops to chew it up. And then she takes another bite and then she stops to chew it. And then she comes in for another one. And this one, she comes in and takes this like massive, huge bite. And then my son has the reaction. And that's where the photo is. Okay. So I'm working the scene and I'm shooting through the entirety of the moment, hoping and working to get something that works. Okay. So the idea here is to shoot more than you normally would, and then shoot even more. Okay. You can always delete photos. You don't have to edit the photos. Some of the contact cards that you get, you won't use any of the images, okay? But just shoot through the entirety of the process, okay? So I'm going to give a couple more examples of this. This is a photo of me, or a photo that I took of my daughter walking her little toy puppy down the road. And so what this started off was her walking it normally. And I was like, oh, well, that's kind of cute. And so I'll take a photo of her kind of walking it in front of her as she normally would. And then it kind of got sidetracked, and then she ended up dragging it. And so I'm taking photos of her dragging it, but I'm not super in love with the composition or the moment. And so I'm trying to work the scene, trying to wait for a better moment, get her feet placed right. I'm like, nothing's quite working. So I go behind her and I'm like, okay, maybe it's just the dog with the leading line of the concrete and her feet walking along the way. Not super in love with that. So I go back and I'm shooting from the other side of the street, trying to get her framed within the grass. And then she does this little look back at the dog while her foot is midair. And then that's the frame that I edit. So of this, there's more than 100 images. And of that, I'm only choosing one to edit. Okay, so just because you shoot a ton doesn't mean you have to edit a ton. So it's more work as you take it, but just because you're doing more work as you take the images doesn't mean you have to do more work on the back end. Okay, here's another example. My son playing with this little leaf bug. And here's the contact card from it. So he gets the leaf bug. We're kind of working the scene. He puts the leaf bug on my dog. That's kind of funny. He picks it back up. We get this image, and then he keeps going. He lets it crawl on my wife and the baby, and then he picks it back up, and then the leaf bug flies away. Okay, so the idea here is that here the image is kind of in the middle. So just because you shoot a ton of images doesn't mean the end images are going to be the best one. Okay, so you shoot through the entirety of the moment because you don't necessarily know which moment is going to be the best one. Okay, another one, my son with a breast pump on his ear, which I think is absolutely hysterical. But this is kind of the lead up to it, right? He's kind of mimicking what my wife normally does, and then it's turned on, so it's making the little noises, and so he thinks that's funny, and so he pulls it up to his ear to hear it. Then I get the image, I keep shooting through it all the way, and then the moment's over. Okay, but for me, this one right here, I love the composition a little bit better. There's some space, and then he's kind of looking down, and so it also has to do like little intricate details will make one image better than another. Okay, so one more. My daughter hugging our Great Dane from above. And then here's the contact card. First, she walks up and is just giving her a kiss, which is super cute. And then she sits down and she's petting her, and that's cute. Gives her another kiss. Okay. And then she gets up, and I could have easily put the camera down and been done, but I waited, and she walked around and she leaned down and gave her a big hug. And that's the photo that I like the most. Okay. So working all the way through. And then when you think the moment's over, wait just a little bit longer until you're absolutely certain that the moment is over. Okay. And then last one, I don't have a contact card for this, but I love this, the end photo. And so I had to throw it in here. It started off as this, just a picture of my daughter on the couch. It's nothing special. The light was interesting. I kind of like the blanket, but it was just it is what it is. And then here comes my son, and he's like laughing, and the pillow collapses down on top of her. And he's laughing at her. She's getting crushed. But the real photo is this one, where he loses interest in me. And then she starts to get pissed and is like, when are you going to get off of me? And so this is the end photo, but it started off as just a quick little, like almost portrait of my daughter on the couch. But then I shot through the entirety of the moment, and got the final result. Okay. Another thing to keep in mind, especially for your own family, if you have pets. So photograph more than people. Okay, so people can be part of it, but try to include your furry friends, like your Great Dane watching over your son, or nap times with your buddy, or that one dog that just has to always be close by. So much so that this dog becomes your son's favorite in all of the house. We had 3 dogs at the time. And all of these pictures are even more meaningful because all 3 of these dogs are no longer with us. And so it hits home harder knowing how, like, at the time I loved these images, but now that they're gone, I love them even more. So images like these go a long way. Okay. Just playing with your dog through the window as she slobbers everywhere, or even just the simple joy of letting him inside, or the confused look on a dog's face when she can't open the door to let her outside, or when they're both curious about the same thing. Okay, so pets are important, include them. even if they are included with your people subjects, okay? And then another thing that thankfully I haven't had to deal with my family, but I have had to deal with it when photographing other families. And so depending on when you're starting this journey, you might have to deal with it. So dealing with the camera aware. And so a lot of the times kids have been taught that when the camera comes up, you look at the camera and you smile, right? But with family documentary photos, that's the opposite of what you want, okay? That said, it's okay for them to look at the camera and you to take a photo, right? There's a handful of photos here that, you know, they see me taking a photo and they look at me taking the photo, and that's totally fine. But in general, I don't want my subjects to look at the camera. And so thankfully, I don't have to deal with that as much with my kids because they've been kind of conditioned that just because the camera's out, they don't have to look. But if it's something that you're dealing with, excuse me, if it's something that you're dealing with, what I do is you have to train them. And that's one reason why I like day in the life sessions, is because they're so long that they kind of learn quickly that just because I'm taking a photo, I don't want them to look. And so if I see them looking at the camera, all I do is I just put the camera down, or I will stop engaging with what they are doing. And so I'm training them that while I'm taking photos, that I don't want them to look at the camera, and I also don't want them to perform for me because I have a camera. And so if I see them performing or I see them looking at the camera, then I'll put it down and I'll shoot something else, so that they will subconsciously realize that they're not going to get rewarded for these certain actions, okay? Because again, I want authentic moments, not them performing for me, okay? But that said, sometimes they'll look at the camera and there's nothing wrong with it. So take it in strides, but in general, my goal is for them not to be looking at the camera unless they're doing something super silly like this, which is hysterical. Okay. Another thing that you need is you must have trust. So this is not only true when you're photographing clients, but also when you're photographing your own family. And so I'm lucky enough to have an amazing wife that trusts me to take photos and have her basically have to do everything while I'm doing those photos, whether that be diaper changes in the parking lot, or when my kid thinks he's helping with laundry, but he's actually not, or when she's carrying a kid and walking hand in hand with a kid. She is great enough that she will let me take a step back and take a photo, and then I can get my photo, and then I can easily go up and I can help. In this situation, I actually have like all the luggage with me. So I put all the luggage down and I take her photo as she's walking away, and then I put the camera and then grab back up all the luggage. But it's definitely nice to have someone that will let you take time to get the images, okay? And the last thing that I want to touch on is that it's more than happy moments, okay? So again, similar to when the camera comes up, we look at it and we smile. We have a tendency to only focus on when there's happy things going on, but there's just as much important moments and just as much importance in boring things and sad things. And so even things like, you know, just winding down for the day, watching something on TV, if the light is interesting or they're laying in an interesting way, and those are things you can take photos of, okay? Or when you're done with a hike and one kid is just super exhausted and just falls asleep while they're resting as he's laid over mom's knee. Or even just like simple things like the baby stealing one of the bigger kids' toothbrushes and thinking that she's like gonna brush her own teeth, or the struggle with getting a shirt taken off, or just the struggle with clothes in general are always super entertaining. And then even just small little details like their tiny little feet and tiny little shoes next to our big shoes. Or when they're watching a soccer game and they have their foot propped up on a ball that has a smiley face on it, like how can you not take that photo? But then also the sad moments. So just because they're crying doesn't mean you can't take a photo. Like this, my son's crying because he can't have another popsicle, which on his lips you can already tell that he's just had a popsicle. Or when it's your party and you'll cry if you want to. And then this next round of examples that I want to show, I'm going to give everybody just a short little trigger warning. It does have images of death and infant loss. And so if that's something that is going to negatively affect you and your mindset, now might be a good time to turn off the presentation. It's almost done. We're just going to run through this and then leave it open for questions. So I want to give you a moment to do that if you need to. But in terms of family documentary, as well as documenting a wedding, there always comes the thought of, should I go there? So like when a kid's crying, like, should I take that photo? Or when a bride is crying, should I get close and get that photo? But for me, the biggest hurdle of this question that I've ever had to go through is this session where I photographed the funeral for a friend who lost their child. And so I had to take pictures of, the mom grieving. And so if you ask yourself, should I go there when the mom's saying goodbye to their son for the last time, before they put the lid on the casket? Like, the easy answer is no. Like, no, I shouldn't go there, because one, it's very uncomfortable to be there, and it feels intrusive. It feels like you shouldn't be taking a photo of a sister saying goodbye to their brother. Sorry. Or taking photos of them grieving. So it's easy to say no, like, no, I shouldn't go there. But if you don't go there, then there's no photos of this. Okay. And there's no memory of it. The daughter that's here probably doesn't have very much of a memory of this event. And so if you don't take the photos, then there's nothing to pass down. And so it's not if you should go there, it's where is the picture? Okay. And if you're there to take pictures, then you need to get your camera in a space where the picture is. Okay. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Jason. We're going to open it up for Q&A now. We do have a question already that came in. Jose joining us on Zoom here asks, if you put any limits on your ISO, some cameras allow for an ISO range to be programmed in. Are you worried about ISO or grain, noise, anything like that?
No, I just have it at the upper limits of the native ISO. So sometimes you can, like, I forget what it's called, where you go past like the native ISO and you can like push it even further. So I just go up to the limits of the native ISO, because for me, it's not about noise and grain. It's I need to get the photo. And if the ISO needs to go that high to get the photo, then it is what it is. Obviously it has the potential to make it less usable. So you just have to keep that in mind. And maybe that's a situation where I go lower in my shutter speed so I can maximize that ISO if there's not a lot of movement. But no, I don't put any sort of limitation on that.
Okay. I mean, I figure for family photos, it's a lot more forgiving rather than a wedding where you might be okay with grain, but you have a client that you have to worry about. And when you're taking images of your family, like you said, the importance is on the moment.
Yeah. And even for weddings, I do the same thing when I'm shooting natural light. But then again, like, obviously when I go into things like receptions or super low light stuff, then I have flashes and lights and all that fun stuff that I take out to combat those types of situations. But I don't do any sort of like lighting type stuff in general for family documentary stuff.
Okay. Jose had another question. I know you mentioned you try not to give any prompts, but do you ever say something as simple as "do that again"?
No. For me, in general, like kids in general just do the same thing over and over again. And so I just hope that they do it again. You totally can, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, there's no rules if that's something that you're okay with. But for me, just and it just makes it more of a challenge, and I appreciate the craft more if I'm not doing that.
What does your percentage look like, Jason, from using mirrorless camera and using your phone?
In general, nowadays, I really just break out, like, I've done it enough that I kind of know the difference between a snapshot and an image. And so if it's something that I want to do just like a quick snapshot of, I'll take out the phone. And then there's also situations where I just don't have the camera, and so I'll use my phone. But in general, if I have my camera, I'm just going to use the camera.
Okay. How much are you documenting at home? Is this something that's a regular part? Is it daily, weekly?
So every single year I do the 50 days project. And it just kind of depends. I try and line it out with my schedule so that I'm not traveling within those 50 days. So I try and look at my schedule and figure out when I'm going to be in town for a full 50 days straight. And so every year I do where I document every single day for 50 straight days. And then from there, I still do here and there, and I'll take the camera out for for all the special occasions or if we go somewhere interesting, and then all the travel and stuff like that. And so it's definitely not every day, but I for sure have at least that 50-day streak where I'm doing it every single day for 50 days. And then I still do it throughout the year though.
I've never heard of that. I like that better. That's like it's like the 365 project for people with ADD like me.
Right? Yeah.
I can't.
It's like I always started those projects when I was starting out, and I never finished them. So this is kind of like, okay, 50 days is doable. So I'll do
Yeah,
that.
I like that. It's
And
easier.
even
It's
then,
like
at the
when
end of the 50 days, like I'm ready to put the camera away and take like a couple weeks break. But
totally. Do you find that does it like leak into your mind? I mean, when you're taking images for clients all the time and you're a professional photographer, sometimes it's hard to just grab the snapshot when you want. Do you find yourself struggling with wanting to turn everything into that moment?
yes, because I mean, there's times where like I'm wanting to take the image, and then I realize like now's not the time for me to be taking photos. Like I need to be helping and wrangling kids or doing something, and so I have to. There is that push and pull there, and then also there's that division, especially when you're documenting your own family, of am I photographing the moment or am I being a part of the moment? And so I try and make sure that I'm still part of the moment, but I also want the time. So there is that like internal battle of being photographer and being present dad that's actually having fun and stuff like that. And so like there's been times where we've been playing, and like my son, my two daughters haven't done it yet, but my son's done it twice, where he just says no more pictures. And it's like, okay, like that's not something that I'm wanting to battle. And so if the two times that he said that, when he says no more pictures, the camera just goes away, and I like, he needs a break, and I'm totally fine with taking a break. It's not about getting the photos. Like the idea is to capture moments that me and them are going to appreciate. And if it becomes a point where I'm forcing it on them, then it loses the value, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And here's a totally 2023 question, because we would never have to have addressed this 10, 15 years ago. One thing I've run into with my son is 6 years old, and I do the same thing. I document all the family moments. My son he's 6 years old. He's not on devices, and he's not on social media. We keep him away from all that. But because I work in this field, he's exposed to it a lot. Have you had to deal with your kids like, oh, post that online or do this? Or, it's almost like kids are exposed to the idea of taking pictures, posting stuff. I mean, my son at 6 years old already realizes, like, if I post a picture online, like, oh, people like it. They think it's funny. They think it's this or that. Have you had to deal with that at all and address that?
No. So our kids have like their little tablets, and they watch YouTube and stuff like that, but they don't know what social media is. Like my son plays Roblox, and he sees that people chat, but he doesn't really know like what it's about or anything like that. And so some of the YouTube videos that he's seen, he's picked up like, don't put that online. Like when he does something silly, he's like, you better not put that online. But it's not like in a serious way. He's just like mimicking what he's heard. Like he's getting ready to be 6 as well. But if it comes to the time where when they get old enough and they do have some sort of like social presence, and they don't want me to share things, or they want me to run things by them, then that'll be a road that we cross then. And that's fine, because it's them and stuff like that. And then obviously there's images, like certain images of bath time or playing in the pool, that like those are just for us or our book, and they're not gonna go on the internet. So there are images that you have to be conscious of, like, this is not something that I want online of my kids and stuff like that. And so there is that as well.
Okay. I wish my son learned, don't put this online. My son's over here doing call to actions. Like every time I have my phone out, it's like, make sure you like and subscribe. I'm like, no. You're too young for this. We're not doing that route. Well, Jason, it's always great having you on. It's been a while. Haven't seen you in a while.
It's good
to connect. Good to see you. Some great images. And really, for those of you out there that, they always say, if you're having trouble getting motivated, if you need something to photograph, shoot what you know, shoot what you love, shoot what's close to you. And I think in doing this and capturing your family, that it really helps you stay tied to the love of photography and documenting. And I think a lot of great stuff comes from that. So thank you for the inspiration more than anything to really just document all the little moments. They really, I think in looking back at your images 30 years from now, these images that you just showed are probably going to affect you a lot more than anything that's won an award.
Absolutely. I mean, even going back like 2 years, like gathering images for this, I was like, oh man, like you totally forget some of these moments and stuff. And it's like, and you think like, I never thought I would forget that, right? But I did forget it until I went back and I saw those images. And so it's just proof that that there's real value here. And then if you don't have kids, I still recommend doing like, go to friends that have kids, especially like I call this like boot camp for wedding photographers. Like if you want to learn how to document real authentic moments for your couples, go document kids because they are bouncing off the walls all the time and you'll get really good at it quick.
Wonderful advice. Well, Jason, again, always great to see you. Always great to learn from you and look at the images. To everybody out there, thank you for getting your questions in. Thank you for watching us as always. But that's it. Another round of the B&H virtual event space in the books. Catch you on next time.
All right, guys, thanks.